This is a podcast about our lived experience, which unfortunately includes infant death and subsequent mental health struggles. Please take good care of yourself and only listen if this content feels safe for you right now. We'll still be here when you're ready.
Hi, I'm Judith.
And I'm Melina. We are internet friends turned real-life friends who both experienced the tragic loss of our sons to sudden infant death syndrome in winter of 2021.
In the year after Aiden died, my husband and I both became unemployed. My parents divorced, and we had to move 5 times for various reasons.
And as for me, just a few weeks before my son Quinn died, my then husband had come out to me as a transgender woman and were subsequently divorcing.
It's been a lot.
It's been a lot.
But as long as we're living, we will love our sons deeply and work to make sure that we live a life that makes them proud.
Welcome to As Long As I'm Living podcast.
We're so glad you're here.
Okay, well, it happened. The Supreme Court has voted to overturn Roe v. Wade. We are here. We are freaked out by this ruling. This is going to have, it's certainly going to impact people's ability to get elective abortions. It's also going to affect people's ability to terminate for medical reasons. This is going to affect women who have ectopic pregnancies, which in those cases, the baby would never survive. And now the mother will potentially die, will be very likely to die. This also could affect fertility procedures like IVF. It could go all the way to limiting access for people to certain types of birth control. Things like IUDs and birth control pills work in part by impeding implantation, so keeping a fertilized egg from implanting in the walls of the uterus. And the reason I say all of this is because some states are considering the beginning of life, personhood, at fertilization. So that means that embryos that are 8 or 10 cells will be granted full personhood, and that terrifies me because I am an adult, living, breathing human being with a uterus, and totally freaks me out the idea that something with 8 or 10 cells, and in fact 1 cell, a fertilized egg, could be considered just as much a person as I am.
Yeah. Okay. Here are some things I've been thinking about. When I was protesting, I saw this woman who had a sign that said pro-choice mom.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was funny. I don't know why I found that funny. Like, was she trying to say she's a pro-choice mom and the fact that she had children, alive children, like she was worried about their future? Was she trying to say, I chose to have children and I'm allowing other people the space to make their own choices? Like that. What was she trying to say there? I'm not quite sure.
I think there's a little bit of a sentiment among moms that's like, I've been through pregnancy and you shouldn't have to do this if you don't want to.
Right.
Maybe.
Right. And I feel
which
like
I agree.
Which I agree. And being through it twice, like, oh my God, horrific. It's just really hard on the body. But I would also say that, like you just said, I've been through pregnancy and I don't feel like anyone should have to go through it if they don't want to. The same token, I've been through grief and loss. I buried a child and I don't think anyone should have to go through that if they don't want to. And I feel like knowing that this decision is going to make more lost moms in the world.
Yeah.
That's, I think, what's been sticking to me more so than I think before. I think before I had my loss, I would have been devastated about this news anyway. But I think now that I've been through loss, I just feel so much compassion for people who've had to make difficult choices. I just feel like so much more compassion for women and families in general who are put in situations where they don't want to be, but they find themselves in anyway. I think it's one thing to say, to sit in your ivory tower and say every life is a life beginning of conception, no matter what. I think that you're just really privileged to have the ability to say that and think that. I think it's much more difficult to say to sit across from someone in a grief support group who buried a child that they really, really wanted.
Right.
Or maybe they didn't want, and then they found out they were pregnant and they were like, okay, let's try it, and then found out that there was a problem and they had to, they had to have a DNC or they had to TFMR, like whatever it is.
Mhm.
It's really hard to sit across from those women in this grief support group and hear the judgment and shame that they feel from other people.
Yeah.
I've heard so many times where they're like, I just say like the pregnancy ended because, or the baby didn't survive, because I feel like there's a lot of judgment if I said I chose to terminate. I think if you're sitting in a grief support group, it's just like all of a sudden you realize how horrific and devastating it is for this one family. And that one person. And so I just feel like it's so unfair that people are making decisions without understanding like how horrific it is. And I really feel like if more men and more women could be in these groups and see how much people suffered, like where is their empathy? Where is their compassion? That's what I'm really struggling. To me, it feels like it's not just that, if I need an abortion, that I wouldn't have access, because the truth is I would, I would. Right. And you would too. We would both have access. I lived in Missouri for 5 years. I wouldn't there, but the truth is you can always drive to Illinois. It's not just drive to Illinois. I'm just saying that, like,
but you have the privilege to take off work and to pay for the abortion.
Yes, exactly. Yes. And I can drive across the border to Illinois. Which is what many people did. But it's because it feels to me like there's a huge group of people in America that have no compassion for grieving mothers and grieving families and creating more grieving parents.
I want to just say this too, like I support the right to abortion in whatever case, but I also, as an infant loss account, like I really feel so strongly about all of these kind of what people consider edge cases, these TFMRs. Oh, the health. Oh, well, in the case of the health of the mother or whatever, those actually don't really feel like edge cases to me. Those are very, very, very real possibilities. And removing the access, like overturning Roe v. Wade, removes all of the nuance from the conversation because they're saying it's bad. You can't do it in any case. And I think we've had some conversations in our DMs, really respectful conversations with people who consider themselves pro-life, who are realizing the impact of what overturning Roe v. Wade means for these particular scenarios where women are going to die. Adult living, breathing women are going to die. And it just completely freaks me out as a person with a uterus. It really does. It really, really freaks me out. I feel very vulnerable.
I also feel very vulnerable, and I feel like very triggered by the whole conversation. I'm sure that's everybody who has had an abortion or maybe had to consider an abortion or whatever it is. I'm sure there's a lot of people who are being triggered right now, but I feel especially triggered right now. When I was done protesting, I really just had to hide in bed.
I mean, so for me too, like, one of the things that I realized at the end of the day is that all day images of my dead baby, physical sensations of my dead baby were rolling through my body and through my mind. And I wasn't really activated by these, like, because I've done some good processing in EMDR and I can think about it without having a panic attack. But truly, yesterday, I would say I thought about my son's dead body 100 times more than I do on an average day. And there's just all this rhetoric around saving babies, around dead babies, that it's hard as a lost parent, as someone who actually has held their dead baby. It really, the absurdity of these 8 to 10 cell organisms being given the same treatment or being considered the same as my 3-month and 27-day-old son who died, like that 8-cell embryo is not the same as my baby. It's just not the same. And so I really bristle at that kind of a pro-life argument.
I don't think it's the same. And it's hard for me to understand
And just to be explicit about it too, like there are some states in the United States right now that had trigger bans on abortion that now give a fertilized egg the same rights as our children.
Let's talk about this for a second. I someone said to me in our comments, I think, they said, when my baby was stillborn, I didn't get a birth certificate because that baby wasn't considered an alive baby. I wasn't allowed to claim it on my taxes because that baby wasn't considered a baby. And yet we're saying that a 6-week fetus is the same. They're not the same. If you consider babies at birth, then at least give people who have stillborn birth certificates and allow them to claim them on their taxes as dependents because you consider them children. Yeah. I feel like that's what's something that's so irritating for me. There's such a lack of support when it comes to stillbirth and it comes to TFMR and it comes to those situations where people say, well, that wasn't a real baby. You know, why are you so upset? Why are you, why aren't you over it? That baby, like, you'll have more kids. You'll have more kids. Well, it's the same thing with the 11-week-old fetus. You'll have more, if you believe that isn't really a baby, you'll have more kids. Don't worry about it. It's fine. Like, these things happen. Then why are we giving that fetus, like, basically more of a say in our society than people who had stillborns, and people don't acknowledge that loss? Yes. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. That makes sense.
Yeah, I find it really difficult because it feels like where the community, the lost community, is screaming, we need support and we need validation and we need acknowledgement, everyone is silent. Yes. But no one is saying, well, I don't hear people screaming, I want more rights for my fetus right now at 11 weeks. I need more rights. No one's saying that.
Yes.
So to me, it's like, could you please listen where the people need support and help us there? No one cares about the rest of the stuff. Like,
right. That's right. And I'll also say, like, 70%, I think, of Americans, at least 2/3 of Americans, support the right to abortion in some cases. And yet, for some reason, we are now being legislated by a minority who says that life begins at fertilization. I mean, it's like, it's just insane. I feel like I'm taking crazy pills. I cannot believe we live here. This is also the same country that said that states have to provide funding for religious schools. It's also the same country that just this week said that there's a constitutional right to concealed carry of weapons. They also removed Miranda rights at the federal level this week. I don't know why I even live here. Like, I'm just disgusted and I'm horrified. I'm outraged. I'm scared.
When I was growing up, there were people I had difference of opinions for, but it wasn't crazy town. Yeah, we had difference of opinions and, like, there were some real arguments. I'm not saying there weren't, but I feel like it's like now there are people who aren't living in the real world. They live in a web of lies, and they are so isolated in their own web of lies that they can't, no facts can permeate. And to me, it's so upsetting because I know that that's fueled by greed and capitalism and, like, the power, and it's like fueled by, like, just like one rich man wanting to get richer.
Ugh, it's disgusting.
I grew up in a community. I'll say this. I grew up in a community. This is really interesting because Judaism's perspective on abortion is totally different than Catholics. And I grew up in a community where certainly there is a large group of people that, like, would not believe in elective abortion.
Sure.
I would say the majority of people in my community would not. Every single person, every rabbi, every community believes it's written out that in the case of danger to the mother or the baby, that you do not have to terminate, and that you do not have to carry the pregnancy to term. Every single one. And what's frustrating for me is that I feel, again, as a minority in this country, part of the beauty is that I'm able to practice my religion the way I want to practice my religion, and you're able to practice your religion the way you want to practice your religion. And it's frustrating to me that my religious rights are being superseded by someone else's religious rights,
Well,
because
it's not just that it's permitted, Judith, right? I think I was supposed to have a baby. She talked about how it's kind of mandated to save the life of the
yes,
mother, right? You have to
yes,
have an abortion
yes.
to save the life of
You
the mother
have
in
to have an
Judaism.
abortion to save saving a life trumps everything. Everything. Saving a life, and the fetus is not considered a life.
Yeah.
It's not.
And so,
And
like you're saying, that's your religious beliefs are being
right,
completely ignored. And now you will not be able to practice your religion in the way that your
right,
religion says you should be
right.
practicing it.
It's really difficult. And I know there have been so many cases where women have gone to rabbis for guidance, and the rabbi says, yes, if you want to terminate this pregnancy, you can. And then, in order for them to practice their religion condoned by their rabbi, they have to leave the state. They have to go to some shady doctor, like, in a different state. Maybe not a shady doctor. They just have to go out of state. They have to pay for all the transportation. And it's just to me, it feels like, again, that if you're a white, rich, Christian male, you have so many more, there's so much more authority
Yes.
and decision-making power than if you're someone who's a minority in any way. I don't think that, I think that Muslims also, if I'm understanding it correctly, in the case of like danger to the mother, support abortion, and I saw that on TikTok earlier. Like, there are a lot of other religions in this country, and just because some religions feel that life begins in conception, and that's their justification, their religion, there's no space for my religion, and my religion says different.
Yeah. I also want to just address quickly. So earlier this week, we released an episode with my friend Emmy. It's called Calamity, and it's a conversation about race and infant loss. And I would really encourage you to listen to that episode. In it, she talks about how she had a C-section, an emergency C-section at 27 weeks because she was dying. And her son, unfortunately, he did live for 15 days, but he did not survive. And I just want to highlight that the people who are going to be the most impacted by this decision are poor people and Black people and other people of color. Because as Judith said, like, there's all this privilege inherent in being white. I mean, obviously white cis men are just living their lives. I don't even know. What must that be like? I don't know. But people with uteruses.
You know what? Some of them are married. I saw
Sure.
this
Well,
guy on
that's true
TikTok.
too. I mean, that's the thing. Like, this affects everybody. Everybody is outraged by this.
Today I saw on TikTok a doctor, who shared the story about how his wife and him had a baby, and the baby was born with microcephaly, and they didn't know until the baby was born. And the baby died at 15 months. He said a couple years later, he and his wife got pregnant again. He was told the microcephaly was like a complete one-off, nothing. Found out the second pregnancy, they found out late, like in the third trimester, that this baby had microcephaly. And knowing that they had to carry the baby to term, and they had to bury another baby at 9 months old. And he said, I love my children, but I'm a broken person because I had to give my son CPR on the living room floor. And I would never, ever, ever put on someone else that they had to have that experience too. And I think he feels if he had the choice, he would have an abortion. Sometimes I think about it, like, I love my son. I'm so glad that I had my 11 weeks and 3 days. Like, I'm so glad I brought him to this world. His life really mattered. But there are a lot of times where I feel like if I knew my son was going to die at 11 weeks, would I put myself through the experience of loss and the trauma that I've been through? And sometimes I just don't know.
Yeah, I know.
If I knew that the baby was going to suffer for 11 weeks and then I was going to suffer for a lifetime, think about how much suffering that is.
That's a lot of suffering. It is a lot of suffering. It feels like there's no humanity.
Yes.
Anymore.
Yeah, I like what you said about the nuance, because these things are nuanced.
Yes. So all this to say,
you were talking about Black people and people of color.
Yeah. So Black people are really going to suffer the most for this. Poor people are going to suffer the most. I would love for all of you to listen to Emmy's episode. We also really want to direct your attention to our episode that we had with my friend Jill, Hadley's mom. She and her husband Eric they had to interrupt their pregnancy and have a TFMR with their daughter Hadley. So we have 2 episodes that are very, very relevant to this conversation that I will link in the description. And yeah, I mean, what a shit show, huh, Judith?
Yeah, so we're actually seeing each other in a few days.
We are.
Like, how do you think that this is going to affect our grief retreat?
I would like to, I'm going to try to deliberately choose to set this aside for 2 days so that I can come back and be ready to fight. I feel like that's important that we do officially rest and focus on our little baby boys.
I do too. I feel like we should spend this time grieving and not think about anything else.
So at the end of this episode, what I'm going to do is the post that we shared has been shared. The post that we made on Instagram has been shared over 500 times and counting, and it's just blowing our minds. But I wanted to share some thoughts that other people have shared with us about that post. So I will just go ahead and read those now. And if you want to send us a voice message or an Instagram message about how you feel, we will add it to this episode. I will go ahead and add it as they come in. So, all right. Somebody says, I'm so over the attack on bodily autonomy and the ability to make educated medical decisions for ourselves in general, but especially as women. This person says, to be clear, abortions are not only needed in elective scenarios, they are often medically necessary. Without them, we are increasing the risk of death for both mom and baby in several scenarios, but I guess that's okay because politics. Someone says, stop focusing on elective and opening your hearts and minds to how this impacts reproductive health care across the board. Someone says, for some in the wrong place, this will be incredibly scary to go through. Yeah, I mean, and that's the other thing too. It's crazy that like one state to another can be so different, but that's the United States for you.
You know, I feel like we should also, I just want to add that I lived in Missouri for 5 years. And I met people who were on the front lines of the choice war there. And they have been working so long and so hard. Like, I interviewed for a job at Planned Parenthood, so I got to meet these women. And I just have so much empathy for the people who have like nonstop been fighting. Yeah. And I just want to honor them because they did incredible work, and this isn't a reflection of them and their work.
I agree.
They still deserve all the applause in the world.
Shout outs
and like
to all of them. We appreciate
Yeah, shout outs to all of them. And I feel like also like I can imagine they're feeling so defeated, and like if we want to crawl into bed, like they want to like crawl into a rock and never come out. So I'm just sending strength to those who've been on the front lines.
Yeah. This person says, I have embryos frozen and won't be able to transfer them for at least 3 years if I'm lucky. So today I'm fearful for many reasons, but particularly afraid that those embryos may have more rights than me one day. This person says, I chose to have a D&C for my failing pregnancy that was in an unknown location. It would have been dangerous and a risk to my life to keep carrying. We need to do better. This person said, when a fetus dies, it begins decomposing in the womb, leading to sepsis in the mother. There is no life to even be saved, and yet a dead fetus has more rights than the living, breathing woman carrying it. This person, who is not in the United States, we actually got tons of messages from people outside the United States too. This person said, no words, America. I really feel for women living in the United States. To lose the right to make decisions for their own body is so wrong. This person said, it hurts too much to explain all the reasons why, but yes, 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 they're really triggered by this news. This person said, my full-term stillborn daughter did not receive a birth certificate. I had to take a tox screen when she stopped moving. But abortion will be considered homicide? How does that make sense? This person says, what about miscarriages? Will I have another entity blaming me on top of me blaming myself? I'm so angry.
That one's powerful.
Yeah. And this person said, so angry, so sad, so triggered as a TFMR mama, ready to fight. I am ready to fight too. Just a reminder to everybody to take some space to breathe as well, and then donate and organize and protest and vote. Okay. All right.
Oh, wait, I wanted to say something.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I went to protest, my mother really did not want me to go.
Yeah.
I think my mom just like is uneasy around big crowds. Like she always thinks there's gonna be a shooting, and she just doesn't want me to die.
Another thing. Welcome to America. This is like a legitimate worry.
So I had like a long talk with my husband. Like, should I go? Should I not go? Should I go? Should I not go? And this is what I ultimately decided. I went by myself. I'll say that. I went by myself. I didn't go with a friend. And it was like, I'm an extrovert, but it's like a little intimidating to go by yourself Like but this is what I decided. And I just want to say this because maybe there's someone else out there that's thinking about going or unsure if they want to go, but like feels weird about going by themselves. First of all, the fact that I went by myself was so not an issue. Like there were tons and tons of people by themselves. And second of all, I was worried I didn't have a poster. Okay, turns out at these protests, people bring poster board and markers, and you just have to show up and you can make your own poster. And something I would say is if you're not someone who wants to like scream and chant and shout, there were women who were giving out sunscreen, water bottles, like this poster board and these markers. Like if you don't want to be a chanter and like a screamer or whatever, then like bring poster board and show up. That is like so helpful. Third of all, I am not a chanter, which is surprising because I know I like.
Because you're noisy as hell. You got a lot to say.
I just I don't like it. But I think one thing I was telling my husband is that when there are all these cameras, if there's 50 women, it doesn't look powerful. The media is watching. And so sometimes this is a lesson. And so sometimes you want to go just to show that you support the cause, even if you're not a chanter and you're not going to sit there and beat on your drums. And I think one of the greatest lessons that I learned from my grief and my loss is that you don't have to know the right words to say. Sometimes saying nothing is the best thing that you can do. The point is showing up. Mm-hmm. I remember the people that showed up for me and they didn't have anything profound to say. They just showed up. And I feel like that's what ultimately made me decide to go protest, is because I feel like there are a lot of women right now that cannot go, whether it's because they're too triggered or they have other responsibilities, they have children to watch. The fact that I had the privilege to go because I had the time, the space, the childcare, I felt like it was my responsibility to go for a woman who maybe wanted to but couldn't. And I felt like it was my responsibility to show up and to show all the women out there that had a loss, that had an abortion, that had TFMR, that I cared. And I want them to know when they look at the TV screen how many people care and how many people are holding a piece of suffering with them. I may not be in Missouri anymore, but I'm thinking of all the friends that I have in Missouri. Yeah. So if you're thinking about going and you're not sure if you should go, I would encourage you to go and bring water bottles and, go for 20 minutes. It all matters.
Yeah, I couldn't agree.
To all of our wonderful new friends, we want to hear from you. Email us at aslongasimlivingpodcast@gmail.com and follow us on Instagram at aslongasimlivingpodcast. We'll get back to you as soon as our grieving brains allow. Yay!